Glue Reaper signing in. On this episode, I'll be showing you how I built a red pine tree in 1/35 scale. It's a very beat and battered old tree, so this is why I made the branches very random, scattered, old, broken, and beat up. So the product I'll be using is Magic Sculpt. It's a 2-part epoxy, and it'll work perfect for this situation. I do need quite a bit of it, so as you can see, I'm mixing up quite a lot. I will be making many different sized trees. And I'm just using a piece of cutting mat that I cut into a small square and using that to help roll it out. So now that you have this long noodle, you basically want the straightest tree you can get. So I just hang it from one of my camera stands and let it set up for a couple hours. And after it's dry, now we can move on to the next step. So I want to add a rough texture to the outside of it so that the bark that I'm applying will stick. This also helps smooth out any raised sections so that we don't have an oblong section to the tree. So now that it's all sanded, I move on to the bark. So I'm using bees putty, which is my favorite. Here I am just kneading it into small patches. Trying to get it to stick to the trunk, which was turning out to be a little bit difficult. So I found this sculpting tool that had this pretty neat texture on it, and that actually helped roll it out smooth onto the tree. So once you get all the bark basically roughed in on the tree trunk, then we can smooth out that texture that we don't want. And I like to use a credit card to smooth things out. And also your fingers work just as good. So now that everything's roughed in, we can move on to the next step. And hand cream to smooth out all that weird texture that we have on there right now. So now it's nice and smooth. So now I'm going to make the tool to create the bark texture that I want, matching the redwood tree bark. And I sort of had to think out of the box here to get that zigzaggy pattern of the bark. So I thought if I bend random shapes to the wire, it'll give me that weird zigzaggy like pattern. Now I know it looks like this really wouldn't work how I'm doing this, but we'll get to that part. And after bending these random zigzag shapes, now we want to glue it to any kind of paintbrush or wooden dowel that you have. And just randomly rolling it around the wooden dowel, creating large, small sections, different sized spots. So now that we have our bark tool, as you can see by rolling it on, it gives me that zigzaggy pattern. And I just continue this throughout the tree. You can add more, less, as much as you want. And this technique can apply to many different bark textures. You can do different patterns, different directions. So it's actually looking pretty good. So now I just want to remove some of the bark at the top of the tree where bark has fallen off. This will add extra texture and give it a cool look. Now I'm not removing it in any particular pattern, and I'm not being neat about it because once we go over it with the bark tool, it'll blend everything together. And now once we go over it, it does the blending for us and it creates that removed bark look. And this is sort of the purpose of doing the bark separate from the entire tree. This way it gives us time to add and subtract things from the bark. So now I'm just drilling a few holes for different branches in random spots around the tree. And I left the tip of the tree not to a perfect point, sort of to a stub. This way I could get a branch that matches the thickness and transition of the tree. And then as I go down the tree, I do less and less holes. So it's almost ready for paint. So back to the technique I used in the other tree video. I remove all the seeds from the branches. It is a time-consuming process, but it does give you a wonderful result in the end. I just installed this small paint booth in my work table, so I'll be using that to spray all the branches. So this is just the base coat. Later we'll add more color. So now that all the branches are painted and ready to go, we can move on to adding the pine needles. And I do use a 2mm static grass and a static grass applicator. You can use basically any type of glue to attach the pine needles. So I wanted to achieve that orangish look to the top of the tree. So I did a couple wet blending with different rust colors, and this actually turned out to look pretty good actually. So just did a heavy wash to the top of the tree, let it dry. And then I moved on to an oil, and the oil will seep into all the bark texture that we applied, and this will add depth to the bark. So now I'm moving to the dry brushing, and I did go with a purple. This is just by looking at reference photos and real life. Trees have this light grayish purplish shade to the bark. Now this is somewhat of a heavy dry brush. I'm not going with a completely dry brush, but this is for a good reason. This is almost like painting the tree. And then as I go up the tree where the bark is on the top, that's a light dry brushing. So as you can see, it's a very tall tree. I did not want to limit myself on the size of the tree. So now I found a branch that matches the transition between the trunk of the tree and then the top. And then working from the top down, just gluing on random branches here and there. So I could have gone for a neater look to the top of this tree, but I kind of wanted an old, beat up, broken, new growth filling in the old growth type tree. So this is why some of the branches are just broken off at the end. And this tree will be going on a diorama, so there is different bits of things flying through the air, knocking branches off, breaking things. So it's also to give it that look. And it's also a winter diorama, so the bright green in a later video will be toned down because I will be applying snow. So just that'll be coming later. And it turned out really nice, and I will have to do a few more trees to fit this diorama, so I will be showing that later. And now you can just enjoy some of the shots of the tree. And thanks for watching. Blue Reaper signing out.